My name is Samantha Duer. I am a SUNY New Paltz student going into my junior year. I am 19 years old, and my ethnic background is Italian, Austrian, and Mexican. The box that I would check in all my US Census surveys would.
Before you get to hear what Sam personally ticks off when having to identify her race and ethnicity, let me provide a short backstory to the entire history of race in relation to the United States Census Bureau. Let's go all the way back to 1790, when the only categories available for self-classification, according to Tanvi Misra of City Lab, were slaves, free white males and females, and all other free persons. This was due to the belief of hypodescent, or the one-drop rule, which in Part 1, Constructing Differences of the 6th edition of Tracy E. Orr's textbook, The Social Construction of Difference and Inequality, Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality, states that one drop of black blood makes you black. Not only did this notion allow for a distinction of racial categories in society in the late 18th century, but also continues to play a huge role for those filling out their U.S. Census forms today. This is because race is now divided into the categories of white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, which means that individuals now have more freedom and choice in their racial identity. Racebox.org exhibits this change over time by visually depicting actual census forms from 1790 onward until 2010. The census forms which Sam and you watching continue to use to this day. Now, back to her answer, for which she personally chooses when filling out the forms regarding her race.
White, almost undoubtedly. But I would always do the question where it asks you if you are Hispanic or not. I always check Hispanic, though I don't feel 100% Hispanic. I didn't feel like I needed to check that box, but it was more just like, for me, like, yeah, I'm Hispanic, even though it's not like a large part of my life. I still identify as a Hispanic, like, woman, so it's more for me, not necessarily for anybody else.
This racial identification as white yet Hispanic by both Sam herself on the U.S. Census and others in society brings up the issue of white privilege, which, as defined by Peggy McIntosh in her article titled White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, can be seen as an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. So, how does Sam feel about this complex issue?
I most definitely benefit from white privilege because I am white, and white privilege is a really big issue that most white people don't identify with, don't acknowledge, but I think that's just terrible because it does exist, and it negatively affects everybody who isn't white. My mother, who's a little bit darker, she's not as obviously Caucasian, she'll have stories that she tells me, and it's heartbreaking to hear, but I do recognize that I don't have the same struggle as she does as she was growing up or even now.
However, although we have come somewhat far in regard to discrimination in America, there still remains quite a bit of racism for people of color and essentially confusion of identity for mixed racial or ethnic children. It is important to note here that while race denotes a group of people who perceive themselves and are perceived by others as possessing distinctive hereditary traits, ethnicity denotes a group of people who perceive themselves and are perceived by others as sharing cultural traits such as religion, language, family, customs, and food preferences. An article from the Pew Research Center, titled Is Being Hispanic a Matter of Race, Ethnicity, or Both?, further addresses this issue in stating that 11% of Hispanic adults say being Hispanic is a part of their racial background, with 56% stating both racial and ethnic background, meaning a net of 67% including it as their race, while 19% include it as the part of their ethnic background, and 13% continue to remain unsure. This confusion translates to struggle, especially when involving parents of different races, like Sam's.
Sometimes I struggle with which side of my family I identify more with, mainly because my upbringing was very neutral. I was in a dual language program in my elementary school, and I stayed in there until maybe second grade because I wasn't learning English. I was only learning Spanish, and like my grades suffered because of that. And my parents made the decision to take me out and only have me in an English language program. And I think that kind of started my, not doubt that I was a part of this culture, but just it distanced me further because I don't speak Spanish. I understand it. My mom and I still speak it, but I just can't speak Spanish. I'm not great at it. I'd love to learn. But mainly because of how I look, I definitely identify more with my white, my Caucasian side of my family. But because of the color of my skin, I don't feel like I can't even claim that I'm Mexican. Like I always like put it in there, and then people are always shocked and like, "Oh, really? That's crazy." And I say, "Yeah, I know it is crazy because, like looking at me, I just look like some white girl." And I've just kind of come to terms with that. If people ask me, I'll kind of give them a little backstory, but it's also kind of like I kind of feel like I'm really dragging the truth, even though it is the truth. I just don't feel like I can claim my Mexicanness if I don't speak the language, or if I don't look the part, or if I wasn't raised like in a 100% Spanish speaking household or a 100% Mexican like household.
And this problem, or rather issue of great confusion with self, only further intensifies when having to fit one's racial and ethnic background into a specific mold. Such forced identification leads to millions of Americans changing their racial or ethnic identity from one census to the next, and results in the questioning of the Bureau's asking of such questions, specifically for the Hispanic community involved, as Sam will now further explain.
I think I always knew I was not fully white because my mom would always speak Spanish to us when we were younger, and she's tan, but she doesn't look like the stereotypical Mexican woman. She has like brown hair, she has green eyes, but I do know that like Mexican people come from like all different backgrounds, and they all look different.
So, considering the differences among individuals of similar descent, one would question the need for a distinction of racial and ethnic categories used in the U.S. Census. This leads us to the potential policy changes of the form, which under White House approval would combine the two questions regarding race and Hispanic origin into one. What I have displayed on the screen now is a drafted version of that 2020 exact census form. Unfortunately, the census under Trump's administration has decided to go back to utilizing the 2010 form with separate questions. Not only does this underrepresent a whole group of people, but further blurs the lines of race for individuals in America. Sam will now summarize her thoughts on this.
Like I always thought it was very interesting that are you of Hispanic descent was like a separate question, because I always thought like, no, that's like a whole background, that's a whole way of life, that's a whole people that you're kind of just like putting into a separate question and not even acknowledging in the previous question that's a required question. Like how would you answer that if you can't? Because people are not white, some people aren't blacks, some people aren't Asian, they're just Hispanic, whatever that means for them, wherever they come from.
And to end on that note, I have a wonderful quote from Omi and Winnott in their published piece, Race and Ethnicity, Racial Formations. It states that there is a continuous temptation to think of race as an essence, as something fixed, concrete, and objective. And there is also an opposite temptation, to see it as a mere illusion, which an ideal social order would eliminate. In our view, it is crucial to break with these habits of thought. The effort must be made to understand race as an unstable and decentered complex of social meanings constantly being transformed by political struggle. And with that, I'd like to say, thanks for watching.